Was this what the worst place imaginable would look like? The sky was full of dark clouds hanging over land stained red. Screams echoed everywhere, and everything was covered in dust and dirt. The monarchs, created in darkness and raised only to cause harm, were destroying every bit of goodness in the land. Their leader, the Dragon King, stood on top of the ruined city and looked around. Where had he gone? When the Shadow Monarch used his special ability to show where he was, the Dragon King thought it meant war was starting. His heart had felt cold and hard during his travels between worlds, but now it started beating strongly again. Very few enemies could ever challenge him, and now that one of them was showing their anger, a great battle was about to begin. The fighting between the two sides in the war was exactly what the ruler of Ruin wanted. It made him very happy, but surprisingly, the Shadow Ruler stayed hidden and didn't come out. Even though one of the human countries was totally destroyed, it would have been incredibly risky to attack with just over 100,000 soldiers when the combined armies of the chaotic world had 10 million. But the Shadow Monarch wouldn't have threatened the Dragon King and risked giving away his hiding place if he was planning to escape. What is he planning? As time passed, the Dragon King became more worried, because he didn't know where or when the Shadow Monarch would attack. He had to move his army carefully, which made them move slower. He was very annoyed because he wanted to defeat all the humans and get ready to fight the powerful rulers. Could it be that he wants to completely destroy humanity, and then use them as soldiers? Still, the Shadow Monarch definitely knew that humans who couldn't use magic wouldn't be very helpful against the destructive army. Just then, a voice broke into his thoughts. People are coming, my lord. One of his old dragon guards told him about an attack. The Dragon King thought all the people in this land who could use magic, called hunters, were already dealt with. The monarch looked up and saw many missiles falling from the sky. Boom! It was a weak attempt from the humans. They wouldn't give up, even though they knew their weapons couldn't hurt the magical creatures. It was quite dull. The Dragon King's eyebrow moved as he went from worried to annoyed, then angry. He told everyone not to interfere. After warning his soldiers, the Dragon King showed his real form for the first time since coming to Earth. The pilots who had tried to hold off the magical creatures were frozen with fear when they saw the huge threat filling the sky. Oh no. Their fear didn't last long. A burst of powerful energy came from his mouth and destroyed all the fighter planes. Whoosh. It only lasted a minute. The pilots risked everything for just 60 seconds. It seemed the Dragon King wasn't happy with their bravery. He lifted his head and let out a loud, scary roar. It was a challenge to the Shadow Monarch. Grace de Belay, Danjuo opened his eyes when he heard the roar. It's time. He had been thinking quietly inside the white castle Baru made for him. Everything was dark and quiet in the very large room. He realized he actually liked being alone in the empty place and felt bad for getting upset with Baru about building it. He quietly said, "Thank you, Baru." Baru had been waiting silently behind Jinwoo and now peeked his head out. "My king, I know." Jinwoo stopped Baru from saying more. Bellion then stood up next to Baru. "This is too risky, sir." Igris walked up behind them, seeming to have been waiting for a moment to speak, and he knelt, lowering his head. "I also think it's a bad idea, sir." Jinwoo looked at the three leaders who were trying to convince him not to go, because the shadow soldiers wouldn't be defeated. As long as their commander was still alive, protecting Jinwoo was their most important job. Sometimes you have to be brave and face a difficult situation even if it's dangerous. This was true for Jinwoo now. Ashbourne, the former Shadow Monarch, had said he admired Jinwoo's courage. Ashbourne liked that Jinwoo always dealt with problems directly, even if it meant taking risks. Jinwoo wondered what Ashbourne would do in this situation. Bellion didn't have an answer as he remembered the previous Shadow Monarch. When other powerful beings tried to defeat the Supreme Being, Ashbourne was the only one who stood against them. The former Shadow Monarch always did what was expected of him, even when things were difficult. Bellion looked up and saw Jinwoo smiling. "I understand now why you remind me of him." Bellion imagined Ashbourne standing where Jinwoo was, so he bowed his head and promised to be loyal to Jinwoo. "I will stay with you forever, my lord." The other two seemed to feel the same way and didn't disagree. "It's about time," Jinwoo said with a smile. Jinwoo took his cell phone out of his pocket. He knew he didn't have much time left, and this might be his last chance to contact his family. But he couldn't make himself push the button to call them. He worried that if he heard their voices he might change his mind. Suddenly a loud cracking sound filled the air. The broken parts of his phone slipped from his grasp and fell to the ground. He would be happy just to hear their voices after the fight. Finding his courage again, Jinwoo took his special daggers from his storage space and held them tightly. Then he ripped his shirt into long pieces and wrapped them around his hands to keep the daggers secure. He wasn't so much worried about falling as he was getting prepared for the fight. He took off his shirt, and his strong muscles moved with each breath. Good. He felt excited about the battle, and his heart began to beat faster. He liked the exciting feeling he got before going into a dungeon. It made him feel prepared. He breathed out slowly and looked carefully at the plan he had practiced in his head many times. He was ready for the challenge. He couldn't make any mistakes. Seeing the strong determination in Jinwoo's eyes, his 3 top assistants nodded. Jinwoo said, "Let's begin." In his office at the Hunters Association of Korea, President Woo remembered something his grandfather had told him. His grandfather said that to understand how serious things were, you just needed to watch the news reporters' faces. Jinchul's grandfather had experienced difficult times and war in South Korea. He held young Jinchul on his lap and told him, "If the anchor looks shiny and cheerful, everything is okay. If it looks a little dim, you should be careful." "You know something bad is happening," when Jinchul quietly said. When the news reporter is trying to seem calm, news reporters try not to appear worried, so they don't scare people watching television, especially when things are really dangerous. Jinchul's grandfather always told him to pay attention if a reporter was trying very hard to stay calm. The woman on TV reporting about what was happening in the United States looked calm and spoke in a steady voice. She said, "When we lost touch with the teams searching for answers, the US government sent in the army to try and get people to safety." Jinchul closed his eyes tightly. He couldn't bear to watch the terrible events happening so far away. He already knew how dangerous the situation was because of what Jinwoo remembered, and he believed nothing could stop what was happening. If even the United States, with its powerful hunters and army, was being badly hurt by these creatures, then people everywhere could only hope for a good outcome. But what amazing event could possibly save them? Jinchul shook his head, trying to forget the idea that even scarier creatures might exist. A miracle, he thought. And speaking of miracles, Jinchul hadn't been able to reach Jinwoo for 3 days. He remembered seeing Jinwoo open many gates during the meeting with leaders from around the world. Jinwoo had a way to go to another world if he chose. Maybe he had already gone. No one would fault him if he did. He could either fight a huge army of 10 million strong soldiers created to cause damage, or find a place where they couldn't follow him. Jinchul wasn't sure what he would choose if he had a different option. He felt like there was nothing left to do except hope for the best. "Please," he said quietly. Jinchul looked up, as if he expected the ceiling to give him some kind of answer. "Please don't leave us." Just then Jinchul was shocked as he watched the TV, his eyes getting bigger at what he saw. Oh no! The strong American Air Force didn't do much better than the Canadian planes against the powerful enemy. Boom! One of the pilots quickly tried to get out of his airplane as the engine broke apart. He cried out loudly as he fell, watching the other pilots disappear in bright flashes. No! Loud booms and explosions filled the air. Even with all the noise, the pilot shouted the names of his friends who were gone. He was falling to the earth very quickly, but he was able to open his parachute just in time. He turned over a few times when he landed. Feeling sick and unsteady, he emptied his stomach. It was a very unpleasant feeling. Tears filled his eyes. He wasn't sure if he was hurting more from his injuries or from feeling weak and unable to defend himself. Either way, he knew time was running out. The air smelled strongly of smoke and blood as dangerous creatures felt him nearby and began to attack. He quickly unfastened the straps of his parachute and took out a gun. "Stop!" he shouted. Bang, bang, bang. The loud noises hurt his ears, but the creatures kept coming. Click, click. The pilot felt terrible, as his gun was now empty. He should have saved one bullet for himself. His hands fell to his sides. The first creature to reach the injured man looked like a giant cockroach. It made a hissing sound as it moved. The pilot's legs gave way as the cockroach-like creature stood over him, and he cried out in sadness. Oh no! Suddenly the bug-like creatures were ripped apart, as if something huge with claws had attacked them. Wow! The crying pilot looked around for what had happened, and his eyes landed on a man who looked Asian. The hunter stood with his back to the pilot, but the knives he held were easy to see. Hatch Hunter Sung. Are you Jinwoo Sung? Jinwoo turned his shoulder to look at the pilot. Jinwoo's face looked so scary. It was hard to tell if he was a friend or an enemy, but his eyes clearly told the pilot to run. There were even more enemies coming toward them, and for a good reason. The pilot quickly said, "Hunter Sung, even for someone as skilled as you, trying to do this by yourself." His suddenly sharp sounds filled the air. Kamish's wrath easily cut through the magical beasts, as if they were made of paper. Before another group of beasts could reach them, Jinwoo turned to the pilot. "Go." "Yes, sir." The pilot finally stood up, and ran away as quickly as he could. Jinwoo watched the person leave and then turned forward. Even though he had defeated many enemies with just 2 attacks, that was only a small part of the battle. Hundreds of magical creatures had smelled the fighting, and were coming closer. Dealing with these creatures would be the first step to winning the war. He took a deep breath as the soldiers from the world of chaos charged toward him, and said a word that would change everything. "Arise." As soon as Jinwoo gave the command, the creatures he had defeated earlier began to rise, and join his army of shadows. Jinwoo had brought magic beasts back to life as soldiers before, but these new shadow soldiers were much stronger than anything he had seen before. Before, the shadow creatures weren't as powerful as they had been when they were alive. This was because the system limited the power of the Shadow Monarch. Now that Jinwoo was the Shadow Monarch, his soldiers could become as strong as they were meant to be. Kree. Dark smoke rose like flames from the new shadow soldiers. They were stronger than ever before. Of course, the stronger the creatures from chaos were, the stronger Jinwoo's new army would become. The very power that allowed the creatures of chaos to cause so much trouble would now be their weakness. Jinwoo gave his new soldiers their first order: "Go fight." Shkudasa. The bug-like shadow soldiers rushed toward the creatures of chaos. Jinwoo went after them, soon passing the others and running right into the group of monsters. Roar. The orcs and ogres were surprised and waved their weapons around, but they couldn't hit Jinwoo. He easily moved away from their attacks and quickly fought back. The magical creatures were shocked, as if a strong wind was blowing through them. Every time Jinwoo used his knives, a dark energy around the blades destroyed not only the creatures but also the ground beneath them. The creatures were defeated before they could even make a sound. Suddenly the sky above Jinwoo became dark. A giant creature stood before him, so tall that Jinwoo had to strain his neck to look up at it. It growled loudly. It held a large stone pillar almost as long as his arm, and its mouth was stained with the blood of many people it had eaten. Jinwoo frowned and quickly stepped forward before the giant could swing its arm. He held his knives in a way he liked best and quickly moved between the giant's legs. He swung one knife as hard as he could. Slish! The dark energy around the knife made a clean cut on the giant's thick ankle. Mata! The giant yelled in pain, and started to fall over until he lost his balance and crashed to the ground. His very large body fell backward with a loud crash. Many magical creatures behind the giant couldn't move quickly enough, and were flattened under its weight. Then dark insect-like soldiers rushed onto the giant that had fallen. It tried to brush them off, but the tiny creatures quickly reached its face and started to bite. Giant's shaking stopped quickly. But this wasn't the end. The Shadow Monarch gave a command. "Get up." Growth. Because of what the bugs did, the shadowy figure that slowly stood up next to the giant's body had no face. More shadow soldiers climbed out from under the giant's body. These soldiers were made from the bodies of dead orcs, and they already held weapons, glaring at the orcs who were once their friends. The shadow army now had over 100 new soldiers. Thud! The creatures of chaos jumped back as the giant shadow soldier moved, but he didn't even notice them. Instead, it leaned down and pulled the stone pillar from the fallen body, taking back its weapon. Splat! Splat! Mud fell from the pillar to the ground. It seemed sad, it hadn't gotten to use this weapon earlier. The giant swung it back as far as possible. The magical creatures who had been enjoying the battle finally understood how powerful this being was, and began to run away in fear. Jinwoo noticed the enemy was scared, and spoke to them using the special language of the monarchs. "What are you afraid of?" He knew his fight had just started. It was too soon for them to be so worried. He gave them a very scary look. Whoosh! The huge shadow soldier hit the ground with its stone pillar, knocking the magic beasts over like little toys. Kronk! As soon as Jinwoo showed up on the battlefield, the watchful Dragon King immediately spotted him. On the eastern side of the battle, the army was spread out everywhere, with the Dragon King in the middle, and the Shadow Monarch appeared on the eastern edge. The old dragons and another monarch realized the Shadow Monarch was moving a moment later. The King of Evil Spirits and the Transfiguration Monarch began to speak. We should gather all our armies, but the Dragon King held up his hand, which surprised everyone listening. The Monarch of Destruction had been eagerly awaiting the Shadow Monarch's arrival, so why did he pause when the Shadow Monarch announced they were going to war? More and more soldiers were changing into the Shadow Monarch soldiers, every second. The worried Transfiguration Monarch, who was now in the body of a short man, tried to speak but was stopped by the Dragon King. The Shadow Army, where is the army of the dead? Even though they were far apart, the Dragon King noticed that there weren't any soldiers hiding in Jinwoo's shadow. Why would Jinwoo do that? The Transfiguration Monarch quickly closed his eyes. A strange glowing eye appeared in the air where the Shadow Monarch had started fighting. The eye looked around at everything nearby. The Dragon King was right. The Shadow Monarch was standing on a battlefield covered in blood, but his soldiers were nowhere to be seen, not even hidden in the shadows. The Transfiguration Monarch opened his eyes and looked at the Dragon King, who was both angry and curious. What was he planning? Why would the Shadow Monarch enter the battle without any soldiers to protect him? This could be their best opportunity to defeat him, but the Dragon King couldn't rush his army into battle without understanding what the Shadow Monarch was planning. A full attack might be exactly what the enemy hoped for. This worry, like trying to see through thick fog, made him pause. One of the old dragons spoke with concern. My lord. A stern look was enough to make the old dragons bow their heads. The Dragon King watched Jinwoo fighting fiercely. The armies of chaos were getting smaller, but the army of the dead was growing larger. He knew he needed to make an important decision, and quickly, but with the war changing in unexpected ways, and Jinwoo's unpredictable power, he wasn't ready just yet. The Dragon King frowned. What are you planning, Jinwoo? Soon, there were so many enemies that Jinwoo seemed to fight without even thinking, quickly defeating them all. Even though his army was getting bigger, it still seemed small compared to the huge number of magical creatures. Jinwoo took a deep breath and focused all his attention. He became like a skilled fighter, his body moving automatically with incredible strength and speed. Many creatures were torn apart very quickly. Rise, and those creatures became new shadow soldiers. The battlefield was covered in dark shadows, like a giant wave taking over everything. Each time Jinwoo moved, the shadows grew bigger. Yatsa, Jinwoo shouted with a powerful roar, pushing those in front of him back. The creatures' ears hurt badly, and they groaned. Shadow soldiers quickly surrounded them before they could react, and their cries filled the battlefield. This had been happening for some time when Jinwoo sensed a different type of magical beast was coming closer. High above, hundreds of winged creatures and people riding them filled the sky. Was this the attacking army? Jinwoo couldn't sense the Dragon King, but that didn't matter right now. He had time to act. Jinwoo just needed to convince the dragonfolk to help him fight. A loud roar sounded. The leading dragonfolk signaled, and the wyverns flew quickly toward Jinwoo. Energy quickly built up inside Jinwoo. This was a chance to make the Dragon King join the battle. He unfairly controlled the Dragon King's people with great power. Jinwoo held out his hands toward the dragons flying toward him. He used his special ability, Ruler's Authority. He focused all his energy into his hands, as if he were squeezing the sky and pulled down something you couldn't see. The magical energy in the air obeyed the Shadow Monarch, and all of the wyverns and dragonfolk, hundreds of them, were suddenly forced to the ground, as if by invisible hands. A loud crashing sound filled the air. It was an amazing sight. The ground trembled from the impact. The force was so strong that Jinwoo was very surprised by the Shadow Monarch's incredible power. But there wasn't time to be amazed, because Jinwoo noticed a dragon that had been hiding behind the group of wyverns. A light shone from the dragon's mouth. The dragon breathed out a huge blast of fire. The dragon flew higher after the attack. It could not feel where its enemy was. Anymore. Had the fire completely destroyed the enemy? The dragon stayed high in the air, and looked around for the Shadow Monarch. When the fire stopped, and the smoke disappeared, the Shadow Monarch was gone. Where did he go? Just then the dragon felt something above it. Before it could even feel scared, it was too late. Jinwoo jumped onto the dragon's head, and stabbed it with his special dagger. Crack. The dagger's energy went right through the dragon's head, and down to its chin. The dragon fell to the ground with a thud. Jinwoo jumped down from the dragon's head. He didn't look back as he told his army to get ready and move toward the other magical creatures. Rise. Behind him, the dragon and hundreds of dragon folk and wyverns stood up like shadows. The Dragon King's powerful army was much stronger than the messy armies of the other leaders, so he knew some of his soldiers had been taken to fight with the Shadow Army. He could not wait any longer, or just be careful. He would not let his soldiers be defeated by the army of the dead. We will fight, the Dragon King told the old dragons. Come with me. Just to be safe, he gave a different order to the Transfiguration Monarch. Stay here, and get ready for any surprise attacks from the Shadow Army. Yes, sir. Hundreds of doorways leading to the battlefield, on the eastern side, appeared before the Dragon King and his guards. He was certain he would defeat the King of the Dead. He felt very angry as he and the old dragons walked through the gates. The army that had fought against the Shadow Monarch's challenges was now finally moving forward. Unlike the big fight happening in the east, the battle in the west was almost over because one side was much stronger than the other.